All right, welcome back to Insights of All Trades, the podcast. This is some episode number, and it's brought to you by Rigging It Gear. So, Cole, take it away.
Oh, yeah. So we have our homie Jacob Younger, who you probably remember from episode 9, who did the through hike of the AT. And on that episode, he was talking about how he had this dream of making his own pack company. And, I think he did go into this a little bit, but he went to school for engineering, and he's kind of applying that to engineering his own packs. And finally, he has come out with his first products for Rigging It Gear is the name of his company. The handle on Instagram, if you want to look into it, is spelled RIGGINITGEAR. So definitely give that a check out. It looks like, just kind of scrolling through his page here, right now it looks like he has some hiking fanny packs to look into. So yeah, definitely check those guys out.
Yeah, can't go wrong with a fanny pack. So, anyways, today's show, we have Tyler Hershey on the show. This is the first one Cole and I are doing in a while together. There were a few we did in between. So this is an exciting one. This is a good one to listen to. We're back, and we got Tyler Hershey on the show. Do you want to introduce Tyler to everybody?
Yeah, so Tyler's a tough one to introduce. He is immersed in, I guess you would say, the international business of aquaculture. And right away in that episode, we get into breaking it down. What is aquaculture and what's his role in the international business relations at the Zeigler Bros company that he works for. So yeah, it's a fun thing to break down. Plus, Tyler also is pretty big into hiking, so we get into some of Tyler's hiking stories as well.
Yeah, and to defer to you a third time, what's our insight for today?
Our insight today, so we kind of touched on this a couple times. We're getting away from the sent-in insights, and we're kind of digging up our own insights that we find through reading, podcasting, etc. And this insight comes to you from Dr. Matthew Walker, who I think we name-dropped a couple times. He's a neuroscientist, and all of his research is done in sleep, and arguably might be the world's foremost leading sleep researcher. He wrote the book Why We Sleep, and in that book, he talks about how if you are a male and you get just 1 hour under your kind of biologically required amount, which he says is approximately 7 hours, you'll have a testosterone level which reflects someone 10 years your senior, which is pretty insane. So if you want to reap the rewards of the energy and muscular recovery and whatnot that comes from reproductive health that comes from adequate testosterone levels, make sure you get your sleep.
Yeah, and to add on to that for all our female listeners, there are so many benefits of getting a good night's sleep. I was at a sleep conference last week, or 2 weeks ago maybe, and we had the keynote speaker was talking about how much sleeping can really affect diseases and aging. So if you're sleeping a lot better and sleeping a lot more, you fend off diseases a lot better, and it slows down the aging process. So, but anyways, this is our next episode, probably 16, 17, 18, somewhere around in there, and enjoy it. Welcome to Insights of All Trades with Cole and Nick. This is where we talk to people we meet along our journeys through medicine, military service, sports, education, and beyond. We hope you enjoy.
All right, we are rolling. Welcome back to the Insights of All Trades podcast. I have someone here with us that I think we name-dropped at least 3 different podcast episodes now. My good friend, Tyler Hershey.
Yeah, hey, glad to be here.
What's up, dude?
Nothing much, just hanging out.
So before we really dive into it, I want to give everyone kind of a background in what it is that Tyler Hershey does. I know that when my friends and family ask me, I have such a hard time explaining to them exactly what your role is within aquaculture, probably because I don't even know how to define what aquaculture is in the first place. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, no problem. Not many people in the United States have a good understanding of what it is. But aquaculture is pretty much just the farming of fish and shrimp for human consumption. My job is I work for a company called Zeigler Bros, based in Pennsylvania. And we sell feed to the fish and shrimp farmers based in different parts of the world. We have a big presence in South America and in Asia. Now we're in the Middle East as well. So my entire job is pretty much focused on making those connections and sales in the developing markets.
So there's a lot of places, rabbit hole wise, we can go down with your role and your job now. But I think one of the most fascinating things about you is, for our age, of course, you're a couple years older than me. Where are you, like 24?
Halfway to 48.
Okay.
Getting old.
Is how much you've seen the world already. And I know there's a bunch of pathways you can take us down, whether you want to start with some experiences in college or what you're doing with your job now. But you've seen, maybe 30 countries now by 24?
Ooh, yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to sit down and count them all. But I have one of those little scratch-off maps that hangs on my wall at home, and it's getting pretty empty. I don't think it'd be... One day I'd like to go back and kind of knock off all the ones I haven't been to. But yeah, so I started traveling a good bit in school. Actually, I have a business degree, and my focus was originally in entrepreneurship. Last second, Messiah has this international business program where they take you to 15 different countries in 6 weeks. And, I had 1 semester left of school and got it in my head that, hey, I haven't traveled at all. And my brother did a lot of it. He was 2 years ahead of me at Messiah, and I was thinking, man, that's something that I want to have the experience to do before I graduate and get a job. So decided I wanted to do it, but like I said, I only had 1 semester left, so I decided to drop out so that I could make it all work financially and my loan could be shifted over to the trip, which was then technically my last semester of school because I only had 12 credits left and it was a 12 credit trip. So I signed up for it and did it, started traveling. We did Europe, Middle East, Asia, and then came back and started working for Zeigler Bros. And, lo and behold, my territories include Europe, Middle East, Asia. So pretty much everywhere I traveled before, now I'm just going back. But it's completely different traveling for work and school. But
so
it's been good.
15 countries in 6 weeks, you said?
Yeah.
What kind of stuff were you doing over those 6 weeks?
Yeah, so we were pretty much just studying international business. And it would all really be dependent on which country we were in. We had the opportunity to tour the Hershey company in China, which was, a great opportunity because, everyone in Pennsylvania knows about the Hershey company. But over in China, they were telling us how they quite haven't been able to crack the code of the Chinese market. And they're still trying really, really hard. But, once they're able to, they feel like it's going to be a huge payout for them. But they haven't quite figured it out yet, but they did share with us that a large majority of their sales actually comes, I think it's a holiday over there. It's not supposed to be a holiday, but it is now. But it's their Singles Day. So it's like the day after Valentine's Day or something. And everyone just buys themselves chocolate. But that's when, most of their sales are coming. And, they're still working on becoming a more popular brand over in China. But it was a lot of visiting with U.S. companies and international companies and figuring out how they do what they do. So in India, we did a lot of microfinance. So for, I guess, anyone who doesn't know what microfinance is, it's essentially micro loans given out to entrepreneurs that have projects that have the ability to be profitable, so that they can turn around and reinvest the money into their families and their communities. And with India being a poorer country and developing country, there's a lot of microfinance efforts going on over there. So we spent some time with companies who specialize in that work. And then in the Middle East, actually, we had the opportunity to tour a company called Chef Middle East. And how we made the connection, had the opportunity to tour them, was a company based in Chambersburg, Martin's Famous Pastry Shop. My girlfriend actually works there now. She's a financial analyst. They do all the rolls for Shake Shack. And they're contracted to do all the rolls for Shake Shack. And then, Shake Shack started expanding in the Middle East. So now you have a company based in Central PA that's trying to figure out international business. And, they signed on a partner. So we spent a lot of time over there with them taking tours of their facility and understanding how they do what they do.
So are all of these companies that you're visiting during these 6 weeks, are they all U.S.-based companies that have ties internationally, or are these other companies also that you're finding that are internationally, like that they're based in a different country and just somehow have a link with your university?
Yeah, it was a big mix. I assume that this trip started out as primarily being like, oh, they have a link somehow with the university. You know, they were an international student and now they lead tours or something like that. But I think as the program developed, they made more connections, and now they have the opportunity to take us throughout a lot of different organizations that aren't affiliated at all. And I think how they do it is, just as things progress and students graduate and get in the international business and things like that, they'll say, oh, can you help us get our foot in the door with so-and-so or your distributor and things like that. So, I think as the international business program grew, the trip had a lot more opportunities to kind of go and see different things.
What was that China Hershey company like? Did they have a chocolate world and all sorts of stuff like that we have here?
Well, they might. It wouldn't surprise me, but we didn't have, the opportunity. Everything we did was, they talked about the business side of things, and pretty much just saw their office buildings. So we didn't get to see any, I didn't see any amusement park or anything like that, at least.
Did you ever do any genealogy and see how your name relates with the original Hershey?
Yeah, actually,
guy?
My dad's pretty into it, and we are related. It's like our great-great-great-great-grandfather's cousin. It's distant. But
why aren't you collecting the cash from that Hershey company, dude?
Dude, I'll tell you what, I tried, but it just didn't work out. No, actually, Milton left, I think, all of his money to the school, the Milton Hershey School. Mm-hmm. So, goes to a great cause. Can't be mad about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did those 6 weeks of traveling through the university, and then you got set up with the company that you're working for now.
Yeah.
So where are all these other visits and other, traveling experiences coming from? Is that all from the company you're with now?
Yeah. So my position originally started out kind of as a backup and kind of like internal communications, like point person for a lot of our customers over in Asia. So I was primarily dealing in India, Vietnam, Indonesia. I did a lot of work pretty much in Southeast Asia, where aquaculture is really popular. But then, as my role developed, I was involved in the company's efforts to push for a distribution partner in the Middle East. There's a lot of government investing going into aquaculture and also food sustainability for like the entire GCC region. So I was a part of the distribution partner search that took us into the Middle East, more specifically Saudi Arabia. So a lot of my travels now are to Saudi, Middle East. I haven't been, but I think my next trip might take me to Kuwait. But then I still primarily go to Southeast Asia too, to kind of keep the relationship up with some of those customers over there.
So with all these international business relations, then, if you compared your perspectives on how international business functions when you were on that Messiah trip to now, a couple years post-grad, how has your perspective shifted?
It's completely different.
In what way?
So, when I was a student, I was traveling with maybe 30, 40 different students from universities that were kind of like all over the United States, and there was always kind of a sense of like a safety net. Like you always had other students with you. You were always traveling in groups. Like even when you would go out at night, like you'd have 4 or 5 friends that you'd always be with, and everything, when you'd be visiting businesses, everything was like always set up for you. Like you'd show up, they knew you were coming, you'd have a name tag and like all this different stuff. But then, when you're traveling by yourself or like with one other person for work, like, you get off the airplane, you're like, all right, hey, I'm in a different country and we've got to figure this out. So it's really different. You don't get to travel with your friends, but it's also a lot funner. I feel like with, when you were traveling as a student, you always had to report to someone. You always had to tell someone like, oh, I'm going here, I'm doing this, or we'll be here tonight. But then, when I'm by myself, it's like, oh, hey, I need dinner. Pull up Google Maps and figure out where I can eat. And I love going to local places, so I find myself in some interesting situations, but it's a lot more fun.
Do you pretty much have a translator with you 24/7 on these trips where you're somewhere that doesn't speak English?
Yes and no. It all depends. Typically the company that we're visiting will set up a translator for us that will stay with us for most of the time, but he has a life too, so he can't just cater to our every need when we're there. So, when we get off the plane, or like we're hanging out at the hotel after, say we're at a conference and it ends and we leave, and I'm texting my boss, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go grab some food. Then I'm just by myself. I don't really have anyone. But.
Yeah. So now that you're in the business side of things and you're traveling to all these different countries that have tons of different political paradigms and setups and all sorts of stuff, have you noticed a big difference between somewhere like the U.S. that's capitalist versus some of these other countries that might have dictatorships and things like that? How does that affect the business, and how does that affect you guys and what you do there?
Yeah, I think it definitely affects us. That's for sure. Like I said, I work a lot in the Middle East where they have a lot of oil money and they're interested in using that money to diversify their economy. So a lot of some startup companies that we're working with will have just won contracts with the government and things like that. So, I think in specific countries, it will really, the government can really kind of spur on growth. But in other countries, it can also really, really limit it. We do a lot of work in China, and, the current trade situation with China is a very real thing for me that I deal with kind of like on a daily basis. There was a couple different routes that you could get product into China on a pretty consistent basis, but the Chinese government has cracked down, and it's become a lot harder here in the past year than it ever has been to move product into China, and they're the biggest aquaculture market in the world. So it can be a bit of a challenge sometimes too. But
yeah, I bet.
For those who aren't aware, like myself, why are we having this kind of trade war with China? And maybe if that's like a little too politically loaded and you don't want to get into the why, what's just like the current state of affairs then with our trade with China?
Well, current state of affairs, they're changing daily, it seems like. But no, pretty much the reason we ended up getting into the trade war was just we currently have a president that, and partially rightfully so, I think, realized what China was doing, and the fact that they weren't necessarily playing fairly. So companies from the United States, obviously China with the growing, they were traditionally kind of more of a poor country, and now they have a growing middle class that has a lot more of a buying power. So you have this situation where a lot of companies in the United States were very interested in, we have two situations. One, companies in the United States who were interested in targeting the Chinese market, were taking products there, and to register, and I think it might be different depending on what product you're working with, but for us to register the product, we pretty much had to list everything that was in it and how it was made. And, then, it's only a matter of time before you have a company in China that's making the exact same product as you. And then you had other companies that were manufacturing product over in China because of the cheap labor, and then bringing it to the United States. But they would spend so much time developing this product and submitting this design, and going through what it takes to bring their concept to market. And then you just had they'd go to this Chinese manufacturer. They'd normally sign non-disclosure agreements and things like that, but a lot of times they wouldn't honor them, and there's nothing the American company could do to protect themselves from having their product manufactured by other companies and then bring it to the United States too. So you ran into a situation where, and it's not just American companies, it's just global companies in general that were doing business with China, were losing a lot of their tech and their proprietary information. And now we have a president that kind of put his foot down and decided enough was enough, and is working to, I don't know, level the playing field. And I'm not saying I agree with him by any means. It has been major struggle for me in the past year. Lots of headaches, lots of products stuck in Hong Kong. Ended up with some product there that we couldn't move in time just because we couldn't get it out. But at the same time, gotta do something about it. Can't just let it go.
Do you see an end in sight with this trade war?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think when you look at the two economies, I think that the United States kind of has the ability to prop up the different industries that are being hit. Soybeans, for example, are getting hit big. So I know that I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was like a price floor on soybeans implemented in this past year to help them out. But in China, I think there's more of a concern that the government has less regard for their people in general, and they'll just keep things going just until they get their way and things kind of go back to normal. But yeah, I think everything, there's a means to an end for everything. And, I definitely think that it could end if, this president is elected or another president's elected and this president's, out of office. But we'll see. Not really sure.
Are there other countries like China that you see that could possibly happen in the future, the same thing, or is really it's China as the main manufacturer and everything?
Yeah,
because if you look at everything, it has made in China on it, so you
yeah.
kind of think that it's probably limited to just China. But are there other countries that this might happen also to a lesser effect?
Oh yeah, no, there definitely are, and I think when I was over there as a student, it was before all this trade war stuff was happening. They were telling us how, like, the businesses we were visiting were telling us how made in China was starting to become kind of like a slogan that they would take pride in, and they'd be like, yeah, everything's made here, made in China. And so, excuse me, like you said, I think you can look at like any product in the United States, it's like made in China. And I think the reason the reason things are at where they are right now with China is just because they're such a big economy and they're developing so quickly, and they truly are now, a superpower, or an economic superpower at least. And I think other countries, we could definitely see the same thing with other countries, but it's going to be to a lesser effect. They're not buying as many U.S. goods. There's less, there's still a lot of manufacturing going on, like Indonesia and Vietnam, Pakistan, but it's a lot less. And really, companies that are working on products there, have the ability to go elsewhere if they feel like their supplier is, not honoring agreements that were made.
Yeah, and you look at some of these countries like India that are just booming as far as population goes, and you feel like it's just a matter of time before they get the right infrastructure and can keep up with China like that. And then perhaps, does that knock down the U.S. as far as like an economic superpower? Do we start losing ground in areas like that? So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, it is. India is an interesting one, actually. India was for the first time ever last year, was the number one exporter of shrimp to, other countries. So they're growing quick, man. If you look at Nellore on Google Maps and zoom in, you can look at like the landscape, and when you're really high up, it's like, oh, those are all farm fields. It makes sense, feed the population. But then you zoom in even closer and you see little white dots in the fields, and those are paddle wheels for aeration in the ponds, and it's all shrimp ponds. Like the entire thing is just shrimp ponds, like the entire coast.
Is that so? Your company here in Pennsylvania, do they farm their own shrimp in Pennsylvania here?
We don't.
Okay.
We don't. It's too cold. Well, so the U.S. is an interesting market in general. Pretty much a large majority of shrimp production is coming from Florida and Texas. And a lot of large international companies actually have their broodstock facilities here. So if you look at the life cycle of a shrimp, there's spawning, you have the hatchery, and then you have the nursery, and then grow out, and then broodstock is essentially like the maturation phase, and for reproduction. And a lot of the international companies will have their broodstock facilities here in the United States, and then once the shrimp spawn and then get to probably about a gram, it's like the nursery stage, they'll ship them to their farm facilities, in different countries. But yeah, so shrimp farming in the United States is pretty much Texas, Florida, and then there's fish production. Ooh, I primarily deal in shrimp, so I'm not entirely sure, but I know there's some trout in Idaho, and there's a lot of catfish farming down in like Louisiana in the South.
So how does a company based in shrimp and fish that's in places like down south in Texas, in Idaho even, how does that company then be based out of Pennsylvania?
Yeah. So you mean the feed company?
Yeah.
So, man, going way back, the company was founded in like the 1930s, I think.
What an interesting time for a company to be founded.
Yeah. But it was primarily focused on
Is this like
livestock.
Great Depression time, like making a feed company?
Wasn't Great Depression time like the 20s? Was it the 20s?
Late 20s, early 30s. Then like, I'm blanking a little here, but the New Deal then is like, I don't know, 32 or something like that. Could be blanking.
I'm not sure. I'd have to ask.
Regardless,
but, yeah.
that is crazy. Before we, I'm sorry,
no.
I don't know if you're gonna go off on a tangent on company history, but I just out of curiosity before we moved on, what's like the ideal conditions then for shrimp farming that makes it that we can't do it around here?
Yeah, really, it's mostly temperature here in Pennsylvania. The water needs to stay a consistent like 28 to 32 degrees Celsius. My mind's always in the Eastern Hemisphere, sorry. But
well, when are we gonna start adopting Celsius and metric and stuff? I feel like
I don't
it's
know.
about time we do that, honestly.
I don't know.
Everybody start the petition.
Yeah. I run into problems all the time at work because none of my customers, it's everything's in metric, and for me, it's pretty easy now. Like I've kind of adopted it, but then I'll be talking to coworkers and I'll be talking about shipping X amount of containers, and once it hits a certain weight, you have to apply for overweight permits and like all that stuff. But I'll be talking about like the weight, and I'll just be thinking in like short tons, and can get myself into trouble quick.
Well, that's how the medical field is too. Everything's in grams and milliliters and centimeters and everything like that. Like it seems like a lot of the U.S. has adopted it in their workforce, the metric system, but for whatever reason, we still just like socially, I guess, use tons and.
Well, I feel like if you're gonna
inches and everything.
As the world kind of becomes more connected, like I feel like you have to understand that, we're the only country that still does this.
Yeah.
It's got to change eventually, but, we'll see.
That'd be something to campaign on as a president. Be like, we're switching it over to the metric system.
I don't know. You might get some pushback, but we'll see.
You probably would.
Yeah.
Sorry, I totally derailed us. You are about to go into company history.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Company was founded way back when. Not sure if it was coming out of the Depression or what, but actually the founders were in a traveling orchestra, and they founded this feed mill. It's primarily focused on livestock feeds. So they were really big in poultry and I think that was primarily what they were focused on. And then Dr. Tom Zeigler, who's 82 now and still comes to work every single day. Not every single day. Mostly he just comes in, grabs a cup of coffee, and heads out. But he came back and he started getting approached by these shrimp farmers in like the 60s that were really kind of pioneering the industry in South America. And they were just getting into farm shrimp, and they said, hey, we need something to feed this shrimp. You're a nutritionist. Can you help us out? And so Dr. Tom kind of put his mind to it and figured out, optimal nutrition. And, we started producing feeds. And then as things progressed, I think companies from the United States kind of have this certain standard of high quality, made in the USA. People in other countries will see that and they'll just be like, oh, this is a high quality diet. And it is, we're regarded as probably one of the top feed manufacturers around the world for the aquaculture industry. But, as things naturally progress, we very quickly became one of the top international feed suppliers to the market in South America. And then here in the early 2000s, our company had this initiative to look towards Asia and Southeast Asia because really, if you look at both shrimp markets, I guess I should back up. Our company primarily decided to focus on shrimp. We still make fish feeds that are like, really high quality, but we're primarily focused on shrimp because there's a lot more money in it. So if you look at the two markets where they were developing, they kind of developed at the same time. In South America, there's a lot of production, but it's still a lot smaller because it's not really the diet of choice. There are a lot of different countries that, eat more fish than we do here, for example. But really, if you look at Asia, like that's what they prefer. Like they don't want to eat beef. They like pork, but they're really interested in eating fish. And so the market, because of that, there's no export. They don't have to send their product anywhere, and it's so much bigger. So in about 2006, our company made the push to get into Asia as well. So we kind of took that brand that we had developed in South America, took it over to Asia, and developed it. And in aquaculture, it's a global market, and we export to over 50 countries. But all the time, you get technicians that are trained in Brazil or Ecuador, and then they get they rise to the top and they're regarded as a very experienced, well-known technician, and they get approached by a company in Indonesia, or they'll get approached by a company in Thailand, and they'll go over and they'll say, oh, we only use Zeigler product. That's what I was trained with. That's what I want to use. That's what my protocol calls for. Then you have this company and they're like, hey, I want a Zeigler product. So that helps a lot. But then our strategic push helped us develop distribution partners in each market, and that's kind of how we got to where we are now. And now, like I said earlier, we export to over 50 different countries around the world. So
awesome, dude. I want to backtrack a little bit. You kind of said with reference to your shrimp feed that the made in the USA has this connotation of high quality that made in other countries, i.e. China, doesn't have that high quality connotation that comes with it.
Yeah.
But from someone that is not well versed in world economics, or truthfully kind of economics in general from a formal education perspective, I don't know how to logically walk someone to the point where because something is made in the USA, you should be supporting these homegrown goods. How would you convince someone of that? Does that make sense?
Convince someone that made in the USA is of higher quality, essentially?
Not necessarily higher quality, but so partially. I feel like it's a little more broadly accepted. Maybe if someone needs convincing of that, then we could go down that rabbit hole. But someone may agree that something made in the USA is typically higher quality, but costs a lot more. So why would I want to pay extra money for something that's 25% better when I can be buying almost the same thing from China for way cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think really when you talk about that, I mean, obviously you have the argument of supporting local jobs and local businesses, but for me, the biggest thing is the quality aspect of it. Um, you know, and like I think you kind of hinted at, like really you don't need to convince people of that. Like people want that quality, and um, it just helps that that's what our market's known for.
I think a lot of it probably comes down to what the product itself is too. Like if
Right.
you're buying pens, you don't really care if it's 25% better and US made, but if you're buying something like a car that you're going to want to have for 10 or 15 years, then maybe you're going to want that higher quality, and maybe you can convince someone more on that. I don't know the business side of things. That's just like my personal take on it.
Yeah,
but-
I mean, I guess I just don't think, when I'm buying something, I mean, even you look at Apple, for the longest time, it was, I'm not sure, but I think they might have originally had like made in the United States, and then they changed it to designed in California. And now they're just starting to I saw on LinkedIn the other day that they had on their packaging, designed in California, manufactured in India, I believe, or something like that. And I'd have to look back to see it exactly, to be sure that it was designed in India, or developed in India. But I think we're kind of at a stage where these companies in the United States, they have such strict procedures on manufacturing their product and quality standards that they now have the ability to start outsourcing a lot of their manufacturing and not losing the quality. So, and like I said earlier, with the whole "Made in China" kind of being a positive slogan now, I think you have a lot of countries that are kind of upping their manufacturing capabilities, and I think we're getting higher quality products coming out of different markets. So
I guess I don't quite understand why we have like such strict rules on what like things that have to pass these quality checks and all of that, but other countries that don't have those same
yeah.
restrictions, we can still buy their products and use their products. It doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't we still have those rules for things that are being imported to our country?
Yeah, well, that's a tricky one. And I don't have any answers, but I've definitely noticed it. So especially when you're looking at shrimp, we have so many rules and regulations on how antibiotics can be used or something like that in food production. So when you look at more, I guess when you take a step back and look at the industry I'm in, it's kind of like the food chain, and we have a lot of standards of like how fish and shrimp, cattle need to be raised and butchered here, but then in other countries they kind of can do what they want and kind of skirt around it, and we import it all anyway. So what's the difference?
Yeah, if we're still consuming it, that I could see if the laws were in place to protect consumers from
Right.
just poor quality foods or products or whatever. But it doesn't really seem like they're in place to protect us if we're still just importing and consuming these same products anyways.
Right, and I think that's changing. I mean, I've talked to my coworkers about it a lot. They were telling me just the other day, one thing that's kind of become a big headache for us right now is how much export we actually do. Like we do so much export that we're kind of getting spread thin, where, I started and I was focused on like 30 different countries. And then once I started to really develop relationships with new distribution partners, it came time to be like, hey, you need to stop playing kind of a backup role over here and start focusing your efforts on getting into these new markets and things like that. So that's kind of how that developed. But, I think a lot of markets 10, 15 years ago, they were just importing everything. If you wanted it, you could import it. You only needed like a commercial invoice and a health certificate, which really weren't that hard to get. But now for every single country that we export to, there's a list of 10 or 15 documents that need to be signed off on. And it's becoming more and more of a challenge, just because the standards are getting harder and harder to meet. And a lot of these customers are consolidating and getting bigger, and they have these contracts with like the EU, for example, and their customers that are buying their shrimp are looking at the like all their suppliers and everything. So they'll actually come and do an audit of our facility, and it's becoming a headache because there's no set concise rule in aquaculture for who's the authority on what. So we have, for example, a certification called Global Gap, and now everyone's switching to BAP. It's Best Aquaculture Practices, and our Global Gap is still accepted everywhere, but now the industry standard is shifting to this other certification. And would it be a hard thing for us to switch and get the other certification? No, probably not. But then you have an additional audit and just a lot more paperwork that you got to do. But to get back to your question, kind of went off on a tangent there, but to get back to your question, I think a lot of these different markets are now requiring things like Global Gap, Best Aquaculture Manufacturer, or Best Aquaculture Practices certifications that are really strict. And it's always a question of like who wants what and what certification will best serve us as a company. So, for example, like in Australia, they have all these different requirements for us to even get into the market. And there was like one requirement that we couldn't meet. And it wasn't even that we couldn't meet it. Like we just didn't have the regulations in place to be able to meet the standard just because we never encountered it before. And it just derailed everything. And now I can't export to, well, certain products I can export to Australia, but some I can't. So
it seems like what you're describing, like the set list of manufacturing practice standards, is a good happy medium to be compared to complete free market where there's no, like, you can import and export everything, especially when what's happening is, say, in the US we have this long list of standards and we're importing things that are not following enough standards to to the point where it has like negative health implications.
Right. Well, they test mostly everything they import,
but the other extreme to that, at least in my mind, looking through the lens of like the pharmaceutical industry, is that you aren't allowed to use any of these prescription drug products that are not made in the US and follow like that, haven't gone through like the FDA's clinical trials. And that's also frustrating to me. Like I don't want to see it shift to that extreme either, because then you can't import anything. And I think that rarely totally inhibiting like the free market is not exactly the best way to go about it.
Right. But then at the same time, you also think about the amount of just regular products, not like pharmaceuticals and things that we ingest into our body, but like just thinking about products like a cell phone and all that. Like we have these moral laws and everything in the US, like, you can't have child labor, you can't have certain amount of like work hours and everything like that. But then we go and buy products from places that do have that. So it's like you're still, you're still benefiting from those, maybe immoral practices, but just it's not happening here, so it's fine.
Right, and that's one thing, that I thought about even before coming onto this podcast. Like, if you look at the global aquaculture market, like there are still developing countries that will use slave labor, for lack of a better term. But you kind of look at how it's developing, and there are two really big companies in Thailand which used to have a bigger issue with slave labor. And they have actually gone through and, completed audits of not just themselves, and they're huge companies, but not just themselves, but all of their suppliers as well. Like they won't buy fish meal from any company that is using slave labor or underage workers to produce their product. So, aquaculture globally has this negative perception of being tied to things like that in these developing countries. But at the same time, the question is, it happened, like you just said, it happens in other industries. Like that's a thing, and we benefit from it. So, people will think about it and be like, oh, that's, such a negative thing to be a part of. But at the same time, it's like, well, I can guarantee that my company doesn't do it, and I can guarantee that the companies I work with don't do it. So, I guess the question becomes like, do you want to be, a force for good in this global market, or do you just want to kind of like turn a blind eye to it and be like, oh, it doesn't happen. I'm not impacted by it in any way in my life here in the United States. Yes, you are, and it happens. So.
Isn't it kind of crazy that it's 2019, almost 2020, and here we are, there's still places in the world where there's slaves, and there's like, I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about you can literally just get on YouTube and watch people selling slaves, and
I didn't know that.
It's just crazy stuff like that still going on. It's like,
it's mind blowing, and it's really disappointing too to think that we're still kind of in a world that in some parts of the world that's accepted, but at the same time, it's not something that you can just be like, oh, doesn't happen. We're not affected by
and
it.
being sheltered here, living in Pennsylvania my whole life, I'm never been exposed to any of that firsthand. But just hearing about it, it's just kind of mind-blowing. But for you, I guess you've traveled around. I'm not sure if you've ever seen anything quite to that extreme, obviously. But have there been things that you've seen around the world that you're just kind of like, wow, that's actually happening?
I haven't seen anything. Well, there's things that I see in other countries that are like, wow, I can't believe that, they do that this way, or like they manufacture it this way, or something like that, or from touring other facilities, or that's not a safe practice, or something like that. But, I don't think, typically when the Americans come to visit, that they try to put on their best faces and everything like that. But, I think before I went to the Middle East for the first time, there's a lot that there's a lot of claims around foreign workers being abused and not having access to like their passports in certain countries and things like that. But I was with there's a company that we work with over there it's pretty large and pretty well known, and I met a lot of people that would just be considered laborers for them. Because like I said, you got a lot of these technicians that know how to do aquaculture growing up in Asia or in South America, and then they make a name for themselves and they're taken to these bigger projects elsewhere that are developing for more opportunity. And I talked to them, and I can't get a hold of them sometimes. I'm like, oh, where are we at? And they're like, oh, I went home for vacation. Like, it's no big deal. And, so while it does happen, like, it's not like every company's that way. Like, I think there's a lot more positive out there that just doesn't, get reported on, things like that. But.
So coming from Pennsylvania and then traveling the world like this, has there been much that's like opened your eyes to just stuff that you wouldn't have seen growing up? How's your mindset, I guess, on just the world and life in general? It's kind of a heavy question, I guess, but like how's that changed since you've traveled to all these different countries?
No, it's definitely changed. My global perception of business has really changed since I was studying in the United States, and then completely shifted it, and just feel like I'm learning something completely different now every day. But I think as a, just as a person, it's really easy to think, oh man, everything's so different now. But, no matter where you go, to me, it really seems like, people are people. And, obviously there are different things you can do in other countries that, you don't do here that would offend people and make them mad. For example, like if you, like a general sitting position here in the United States where you put your foot up on your knee and expose the sole of your shoe. In the Middle East, like that's a no-go. Like don't do that. You'll offend whoever you're with, or, don't give them a thumbs up. This is a Middle East one as well. It's essentially like flipping someone off. But there are things like that I'll definitely mess up from time to time, just being an American, kind of ignorant to it. But, I think the more and more I get out and travel, the more and more I just realize that people are people. People are trying to make a living. I like to think people are trying to do the right thing. So, it kind of made me think we're more similar to everyone else than we typically think that we are. But, in terms of like daily life, I don't think it's really changed much. I just appreciate what we have here a lot more. We live in one of the most developed countries in the world, and we live in a lot of comfort. Like unless I want to skip a meal, like I never really have to. I know that's not the case for everyone, but I have access to food all the time, clean water. I just turn the spigot on, fill up water.
You got a car, you got a house and heat and everything.
Yeah, it's completely different. We're super comfortable over here, and just going into other countries kind of makes you realize that even in these other developed countries, like it's not as comfortable. Like when I was a student, I was in Switzerland at one of their universities, and I love Switzerland. It was great, but like their universities, like they just like weren't comfortable at all. And I didn't really think Europe was that comfortable at all either. Like I loved being there, but in terms of just general comfort, like I didn't think it was like the same standard. And people might disagree with me on that, but I might just like the United States, I guess.
Would you say it's that contrast then of going from, I really don't want to say subpar conditions, because they're, especially in somewhere like another quote unquote developed country like the places you've seen in Europe, is it that, I don't know, do you think that, where I'm going with this is, do you think it's that like you've grown up around this and that this is your comfort and that maybe they would perceive it as comfortable there? Or do you think if you tried to look through like an unbiased lens as possible, do you think if those same people came here, do you think it is truly a higher baseline of, we'll say, comfortable living for simplicity?
That's a good question, and I'm definitely biased, that's for sure. But I almost think that other people that were coming here that were used to a different like standard level of comfort, they would feel like we live in excess comfort is my guess. Like for example, I had a lot of international friends in college, and all the time, like I would just be like, oh, let's drive to the store, and they're like, oh no, I'm gonna walk. I'm like, you're gonna walk? It's like 1.5 miles. Why are you gonna walk? And they're like, I'm just gonna walk. Or I'm like, oh, let's grab an Uber, and they're like, oh no big deal, just walk there. I think they would probably think that we live in excess comfort, but that's just me. It's probably going to be different depending on who you ask and where they're coming from. But
it is kind of crazy the ability that humans have to adapt to situations, though. So if we were growing up in somewhere like that wasn't quite as comfortable, we would say, I feel like we would still, I don't know, like I feel like there's such a powerful drive behind humans to be able to adapt to everything. Yeah. So it might be weird, like a culture shock either way, going from somewhere like Europe, even like, it's kind of different, but still pretty comfortable living, to here they might not like it quite as much. But after you have been there for a little while, I'm sure they would adapt.
That's true. I think we just had, a few weeks ago, we had all of our international team in to visit, and we went to this ski resort and, had meetings and kind of planned for like the next couple years. And it was really funny. Like the first day we sat down and we were served meals, and they were like, oh, this is a lot of food, just because the portions were so big. But then by the last day, they're just cleaning their plate, just in that little amount of time, they got used to eating that much food at the meals and things like that. But yeah.
So, gonna flip the script a little bit and turn this into seeking uncomfortability.
Ooh.
We have spent a good bit of time hiking together.
Yeah.
And you're looking at kind of planning a really long through hike. Maybe, I don't know if it will be in the next year or so, but with either doing like the Continental Divide or the PCT. Can you kind of walk us through that thought process of why you would want to do something like that?
Yeah. If I had to pick one, I'd probably pick the PCT, just me personally. Just because I think those states are just beautiful.
Right, and that's starts in New Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Goes up to Washington State.
Yep. Well, it goes up into Canada, but yeah, in the United States it ends in Washington. But I actually got into backpacking in college. As you know, you've done some trips with me. But I just enjoyed doing, going out and covering these different trails and getting to see, different things that a lot of people, don't generally get to see. And just having the opportunity to go see these places with a backpack on my back, I started enjoying it. And then, as things progress, the more and more I got into it, the crazier ideas I got. I'm like, hey, someday I could do one of these long distance trails. So I'd definitely like to do one day, but got to see how things all unfold.
What has your best distance feats been so far?
It's not much, compared to your previous guest, Jacob Younger. Nothing like the AT, but I did the LT here this past year, which was like a 70-mile trail.
That's the Loyal Sock?
Yeah, Loyal Sock Trail. We did, and because of work, I got to plan it around, my vacation days and everything like that. So we did it in essentially three 20-mile days. And, 20 miles a day is no slouch. But at the same time, we weren't in hiking shape or anything. Like I still run and everything like that, but it's not what you're going to get into after being like a month on trail or something. But we're looking at doing Younger, previous guest, and I are looking at doing a long distance trail here this year. We're looking at going and doing a trail in Utah or in Washington that's probably going to put us right around 100 miles, which will be probably my longest trail to date if we get it done.
So what's your main drives behind this? Do you like just being disconnected from, society for a little while? Do you like the uncomfortability of being out there in the middle of, the trail and, your feet are aching, you're tired, things like that? What do you like to get out of these kinds of big hikes?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's probably a lot of different things, but I like being disconnected. So for me right now with work, like my day doesn't really stop, because when my day is stopping, everyone else is just waking up. I start my day, I'm talking to customers in China, and then or China, Thailand, pretty much anywhere over in Asia, and then it shifts to the Middle East where they're kind of just finishing out their work day, and I'm in the later morning, and then things die down a little bit after lunch, but then picks right back up again with Australia as soon as I'm leaving. And then when I'm going to bed, I'm getting texts and emails from Asia again. So it never really stops. So for me, I like just being able to disconnect and not being able to talk to anyone, not being able to be reached, even if someone needed me. And I was talking to my boss about it. I went on this past year. Me and my girlfriend did a road trip. We went out and we did Yosemite, Big Sur, we did the Redwoods, and went up into Oregon, visit with some family there. But I messaged my boss whenever I would be on the highway, like in between the national parks, and he didn't really understand like why I was messaging him. I would just message him, be like, "Hey, do you need me for anything? Like, is everything going smoothly?" And then after the fact, we had a conversation, and he was like, I didn't think about it until you told me about the trip afterwards, but you're probably one of the only employees that when you say you can't reach me by phone, like you actually can't reach me by phone. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. That's why I was messaging you, because, I had limited access. But yeah, I think that's probably what I enjoy the most. It's really refreshing just because I'm plugged in all the time. So
I think that would be the biggest appeal for me as well. I've never done it, but I think that does sound very nice, just being able to completely disconnect from everything. I know if I'm just sitting around during the day, I'm kind of itching to check my phone all the time and itching to, see what the latest thing online is. It would be very nice to have your mind just clear of all that and just be out on the trail.
Yeah, it's nice, and that's my biggest thing is probably my phone. Like I've tried deleting social media multiple times without fail. I've tried to stop using my phone. Actually, just recently, I broke my phone screen and I got it replaced by someone that wasn't affiliated with Apple at all, and I'm having some glitches now. And when it happened, I was like, oh man, this is great. Like I'm not gonna use my phone so much anymore because I'm gonna be so frustrated with it. But now I've probably am using it more because I'm sitting here like fixing my texts and everything like that, just because I'm more frustrated with it. And fixing everything. But
Yeah, I've
you
tried
know.
the whole social media deletion thing too, but then I end up just spending just as much time just texting people and
Yeah,
like
that's
or
true.
just reading news or something on my phone. It's just I always find some sort of distraction that involves my phone, which I need to just get out of that, but I don't know how. I think not everyone, but a huge majority of the U.S. and probably even worldwide is addicted to these things,
Yeah.
and
It's
I
kind of like an extension of ourselves at
yeah,
this
it really
point.
is,
Yeah.
and it's kind of hard to see myself without my phone ever really.
Yeah.
But say that 15 years ago to somebody, and they'd say you're crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, 15 years ago, they have like those flip Motorola Razors where it's like,
All the cool kids had one.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
But like going back to what you said, I feel like there is that appeal of being disconnected, but by being disconnected from your phone, or maybe it's not even just your phone, but you aren't going through your day-to-day life at your job.
Yeah.
Even if it's a job you enjoy, feel like you aren't as primed to go through like states of awe. And I'm not even like trying to be poetic here, but I don't know how else to put it. When you're, hiking and you get to like some huge vista, like that vista probably wouldn't be nearly as special if you could snap your fingers and you go straight from your office to that vista where you're just anxious about such and such, or you're like typing out an email and whatnot.
Right.
Like by
Yeah.
being disconnected, I feel like you're primed to like have that, I don't know, ecstasy like feeling of like going through the disconnected hard work of a
Yeah.
hike.
Or even just following all these accounts on Instagram that put up
Yeah.
these beautiful photos all the time. I feel like that takes away from it too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like different when you're looking at Instagram and you're seeing all these beautiful places like out west, and then you're like, oh, I want to go on a hike, and then you go on a hike here in Pennsylvania, and you're like, man, these mountains, like these are not even mountains, like what's going on? But it's different, and I feel like when you're completely disconnected, can't be looking at anything, like you do appreciate it, probably even more so, and. I think it's also like the hard work of hiking. Like same if you'd be able to like drive your car to the vista or something. Like I don't know. In my opinion, I enjoy it a lot more if I'm going to work for it. And
I agree.
put in
We
my
had
own
this
sweat.
come up before.
We did talk
and
about
I was
it
talking about how I was violently opposed to being able to like drive to good lookouts.
Yeah, was that with Caleb or somebody?
I forget. I'm blanking.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember this conversation before. It's funny.
It is a good feeling to earn it.
Yeah.
well,
I agree.
Yeah, I think I brought it up before too, but there is a like psychological concept behind it that basically, you don't appreciate it as much if you would drive up to the top versus just seeing. I forget what it's called, but
Yeah.
I don't know,
No,
we'll
makes
find
sense.
out on the other episode.
But like also a lot of the most memorable parts of my hikes and camping trips is rarely ever, just reflecting on the view that I got. It's pretty much always like having some crazy conversation with the people that I'm with. Or
Yeah.
like for example, when you and Younger and I were on the Loyal Sock Trail, like we have like the ongoing joke of like me eating through jars of Goobers
Dude,
peanut
that was
butter.
hilarious.
First off, it is a great way to pack in a bunch of calories for a hiking
It was
trip.
the only time I've ever seen someone show up with a glass jar of Goobers, jelly, and peanut. I don't even know what it's called.
Yeah, Goobers. It's like the peanut butter and the grape jelly mixed together. I'll just truck through it. Our cameraman, Hunter, who I also hike with a lot, is just shaking his head dying behind the camera right now because I truck through Goobers jelly on hikes. It's such a good way to pack in calories in a little glass
but
jar.
we hiked like 20 miles that day, and so all me and my friends, we have our pack weights pretty dialed in at this point. We carry around 10, 12 pounds worth of stuff at a time, which is considered ultra light.
Not me.
And we stopped to eat after hiking, all day, and Cole just pulls out this jar of Goober's jelly, and I'm like, "You've been carrying this all day."
Jeez.
I have
there you
not
go.
subscribed to the ultralight school of thought.
You'll get there. It's a progression.
But it's little goofy things like that add on to the trip.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So if you're like just driving up to Vistas and you step out for 15 minutes and then you drive away, that would take away almost all of the important parts of all of these backpacking /
Unless your
hiking.
car breaks down.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what, part of my favorite experiences are like, when you're doing something fun and then you get caught in a thunderstorm and you're like, oh, this really sucks, and like all your stuff is wet, and then you got to figure it out. And then I think you and I have talked about this a lot. It becomes what I like to call type 2 fun. Like, it's not fun when you're doing it and it's terrible, but then after the fact, like when you look back on it, that's what you remember and that's what you enjoy.
As opposed to type 1 fun, that's just inherently fun.
That's just actual fun.
I think the type 2 fun becomes the better story.
Yeah, it does. It does in the end. But you have to give yourself some time to get away from it and stop being upset about it first.
There's only so much type 2 fun you can take. And
True. I'm a once a month type 2 fun kind of guy. You have to go through those nights of getting rained on in a hammock and walking through thunderstorms and running out of food too early. It becomes good stories to tell. And also it shows you like how adorable you are as a human species.
Yeah, I remember listening to Younger's podcast, and I'm good friends with him, so we were texting throughout like the entire AT, and he would tell me stuff that he would do when he was backpacking, and I've never done a through hike, so I wouldn't even think like, oh, I'm gonna leave this at home. I'm gonna leave this piece of gear. I don't need it. And then he and I went ahead and we did. But he would text me and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, I didn't bring it." I'm like, "Why don't you just use this?" He's like, "Oh, I didn't think I would need a rain jacket or something like that," when he was up in like Vermont and Maine. And we did a hike together, and we were getting ready. We did the Loyal Sock together this past year, and we were getting ready to do it. And he just like threw everything was just sprawled out in his car, and he was just throwing stuff into his backpack. And I'm like, "Hey, you're forgetting this, pulling it out of like the front seat, because he's pulling stuff out of the back seat." And he's like, "It doesn't really matter. I don't need that." And I'm like, what are you gonna do when we need it? He's like, "Figure it out then. Like, I don't care." But yeah.
Hence Younger's pack company name, Riggin' It Gear.
Yeah, it makes sense. It fits him well. But
check him out.
Yeah, definitely. He's an interesting guy. I remember him saying on his hike he got dumped on the way almost at the end, and now that's like a good story for him, I guess. But imagine how crappy that was in the moment.
Oh my word,
that'd be nice.
I don't even know if you could consider that type 2 fun.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just a different level.
Type 3 fun.
Yeah. It's like, at least I'm not connected to my phone for this.
Yeah. Jeez.
And we didn't even capture on camera that he had like the bear encounter.
Oh yeah,
right at the end.
I can't believe you guys didn't talk about that. I was sitting at work one day and I just get this text from him. He's like, "I just got charged by a black bear." I'm like, what? What are you doing? But hey,
that's insane.
That's what happens when you're doing a 2,000-mile hike.
Did either of you guys go out hunting today? First day of deer season?
I did.
Did you? Did you get anything?
Saw a nice. Well, I shouldn't say a nice. I saw a mediocre 4-point or 5-point, but I think you have to have 3 spikes on each side. I think it was just a 4. I could only see one side of it, and it kind of left before.
Is it
I
like
could
if you're under
see if
16 or something, you could shoot it, but not?
Yeah. But if I was 15, if it's brown, it's down. Taking it out. Plus, this was the first year that I could go hunting in a long time, because they bumped back the first day in PA.
Right. Yeah, that's what I used to go hunting like when I was younger. But then once I started wrestling, took up all my time, and I was just like, all right, well, one's got to go. I'm not going to stop wrestling, so I guess I got to give up hunting, and I've just never gotten back into it. But it is nice that they moved it back a day so that you can go and enjoy it before going back.
I kind of want to get into archery sometime, because it seems like it just requires so much more skill than rifle. Like, for example, I very comfortably went out knowing that I could kill a deer today with my rifle, despite not having shot my rifle in like 5 or 6 years.
Right.
That cannot be done in archery. You're like training nonstop with your bow up until the season. So that way, it all builds up into that one moment. So that way you can't miss with your bow.
So not to encourage loopholes, but can you use like a crossbow or something?
You can. I consider it a loophole.
Now, can everyone use a crossbow, or is it like only certain people that can use it?
I think everyone can use it within archery, but it's like, dang, if you don't have like, this is getting to touchy territory probably for some Juniata County listeners, but honestly, if you don't have some physical limitation to the crossbow and you're hunting it just to like have that loophole of you hunt archery, but it's very, very easy comparatively to like shooting a normal bow.
Well, I mean, you do get access to hunting earlier, right? through archery.
Yeah.
It's a different season, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess that would be like the people that don't want to do archery, but they still want to get a deer. Maybe, I don't know.
I guess.
It seems. Yeah.
I know. Archery definitely adds different element to it, though.
For sure. But real quick, before we get totally away from the hiking mix, and also for the purpose of teasing out some insights, what's your gear loadout look like for, say, and if you want to do the difference between, obviously, like a day hike, you're just going, like, rocking a cinch pack and whatnot,
Yeah.
but for a multiple day hike, what's that look like?
So like I said earlier, my pack weight is now considered ultralight. I made that switch here in this past year. So I don't really want to get into too many specifics because no one's going to know what I'm talking about. But for my backpack, I went with a frameless pack with no hip belt either. So typically when you see a backpacker, you think, oh, they're rocking this big hip belt. And the pack's like towering above their heads, like 20. Whoa. I wonder if you guys heard that. But it's like 20, 30 pounds. But, I don't have any frame on my backpack. I don't have any hip belt. And I don't have any like internal bladder in the pack or anything. So I have to carry all my water externally. And it's just a roll top. It's made out of X-Pack. It's by a company called Waymark Gear Co. But the entire pack only weighs... I don't even know off the top of my head. Jacob's probably somewhere making fun of me. But it's like a pound, a little over a pound.
Jeez.
But then all my gear in turn also has to be extremely light to, be able to do that style of hiking comfortably. So, I'll typically wear a pair of Ultras. They're a running shoe company that got into, primarily making minimalist shoes for like marathoners and ultra marathoners and stuff. And then I just wear a pair of running shorts and then like a thin synthetic t-shirt. And then my fleece, I actually have it on right now. It's a fleece by a company in Colorado called the Melanzana. It's a microgrid, so it will breathe both ways. And it, helps you sweat a little less when you're backpacking. You're not really going to get away from it. But yeah, and then my tent, I currently have a tent called the Nemo Hornet 2P, but I think I'm going to sell it and get a Cuban fiber tent because the one I currently have weighs about like 32 ounces or something like that, and I want to go even lighter. So like when I backpack with Younger, he only carries a tarp, and that's it, and it just weighs like 11 or like 13 ounces or something like that.
That's ridiculous. What's the trade-off of not having the hip belt? Why would someone make the case that like you need the hip belt there?
Well, people say you need the hip belt just to carry the weight because if you're not wearing the hip belt, you have to carry all the weight on like your shoulders.
So it's kind of just like another point of contact that it like attaches it to your center mass.
And it's a lot easier to load all the weight on your hips if you're doing like 10, 15 mile days, but that is if you're carrying 20, 30 pounds. If you're like my entire backpack without food and water, which in hiking is considered like your base weight, it weighs like 8.6 pounds or something like that. And then once you add food, it really doesn't get over 15. And
unless you're loaded up on Goober's jelly.
Right, that'll But I can put all that on my back and carry it all day, no problem. So, that some people say, or some people's like biggest fear is getting away from the hip belt because they say it's like harder on your shoulders and stuff. But I haven't had a problem with it. I actually feel a lot better without a hip belt than I did previously.
So say you get charged by a bear like Jacob. What kind of self-defense do you have on you when you're on the trail? Do you just have a knife or do you...
I carry a pocket knife like this big.
The power of prayer.
Yeah. When he got charged, it really depends what bear it is. If I'm out west, then I lived out there for a while, and I pretty much always had bear spray on me, which shoots like 30 yards. It's like a canister about this big. But here on the East Coast, I don't really carry anything. Like I said, I have a little pocket knife. But if a bear were to come at me, with a black bear, I think you're supposed to make yourself like as big as possible and face it. And I guess I'd use my hiking poles to try and scare it off, but really I wouldn't have much.
Yeah.
But
dang.
Thankfully, I've never been in that situation.
Yeah, that would be so scary. Jeez.
So
That's a true fight or flight.
how about it? You talked about living out west. I almost forgot. This is when you were kind of going through your startup company, right?
Oh yeah.
Can you talk about that at all? I don't know
I can.
what the go for it. So I don't want to, spoil it for anyone, but like from start to finish, what did that look like? Did you end up like
Living out west or the whole startup thing?
the startup thing?
Oh well, the startup thing, yeah. You talking about Sapwood?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Messiah does this thing that they call the Impact Venture Challenge, and it's essentially kind of like a Shark Tank-like thing where different teams submit ideas and essentially compete for prize money to go about doing their venture. And for my team, we came up with this all-natural air freshener idea. It was one of the friends of mine came up with it, and we partnered, I think it was with a company called like Trees for the Future. So for every air freshener we would sell through them and their connections, we would be able to plant a tree. So, you kind of had that give back side of the business as well. But Messiah does this thing called the Impact Venture Challenge, where, initially you'll submit an idea, you'll submit business plan, financials, and then you'll get connected with a mentor, and it's all throughout a process. So each process, they'll cut teams out. And then at the very end of the year, they bring all the teams together on stage in one night, and everyone pitches. And then out of those final, I don't even remember how many teams make it to the final, but out of those like 10 teams, that's voted on by a panel of like business owners and professionals, will get seed money for their projects. And we took second in the process, so we got some seed money, and we made it happen. And I'm not a part of it anymore, but I think it's still pretty much a thing today. I think you can still order one. It was a great experience, and that's initially like my concentration was entrepreneurship, and that's where I really fell in love with business. Like when I started, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to have a business major. But I'd be taking these gen eds that were required for business, and I was just like, I don't really love it, not really sure. And then I started doing entrepreneurship and building and creating my own thing, and seeing how these different classes would tie in to my own venture, and I became a lot more passionate about it. And yeah, so we took second, and sold a few thousand air fresheners, and it was a great time, and it made me a lot more passionate about business. So
For maybe like a younger listener demographic that doesn't really know the distinction between general business ideology and entrepreneurship, what does it mean to you to like think like an entrepreneur then? And also, this is kind of a loaded question, but what about entrepreneurship then made you certain that business is what you wanted to do?
Yeah, no, yeah, that is a loaded question.
I know,
but,
big one to tackle.
I think traditional business, like you think of finance, and you just think of like business management, and just a lot of like what the generalities of business would be. But what I kind of fell in love with entrepreneurship is it was a lot more of going out and doing and creating and finding solutions to problems, and fixing things that when you initially started you didn't even know was going to come up. So like, for example, when we started it, when we were in the prototype stage, like we designed the product, we had someone design it for us in CAD, cut it out. We did a lot of different scent retention tests, because it was an air freshener, so you got to figure out like how long is it going to last, and like is it going to stand up to other air fresheners, and you got to figure out where you're at versus like the competition. But we were in a situation where, hey, look, like we made these prototypes, but it was like $6-7 a prototype. And then we got to figure out, okay, how can we make this cheaper? How can we make this like viable to sell to consumers? Like we can't be selling an air freshener for $15. It doesn't matter how many trees we're planting, like no one's going to buy it. So that's a problem. Like how do we make this financially viable for us? And going out, making connections, going to different lumber yards and, being able to buy in bulk quantities and things like that. Like we were able to work the price point or the manufacturing price down to under $1 a unit. And, it's things like that I really, really enjoy, I guess, just going out and doing and being a problem solver. And I think, in my opinion, it really ties well into my job now because, every day I'm running into situations where government, this has happened multiple times this year. We have a container in port somewhere and the government authorities are saying, hey, you didn't provide this document, or we tested it for salmonella and it didn't pass, and then, it's how am I going to be able to figure this out? Like where we're at now, we have a container in port. How am I going to figure this out, and how am I going to achieve the most desired result for us? So a lot of times, that's going to different authorities here in the United States, going to our QA team, checking testing and things like that. But it all ties back into having a unique problem that you didn't know was there and you didn't know it was coming, and solving it to the best, in a way that suits both yourself and your customers so that everyone's happy. So that's kind of, in my opinion, one big thing that entrepreneurship kind of helped me with.
So what kind of long-term goals do you have with the company you're with right now, or just, what kind of career plans do you have in the future?
Yeah, nothing's set in stone, right? I do really love the company. They've given me a lot of great opportunities, and I think I could definitely have a future there. I'm more and more every day I'm working with companies or new developing projects that are based in the U.S. and in Canada, which has a lot of indoor facilities that are targeting the U.S. market because consumers are willing to pay more for shrimp that, has never been frozen. And, it's made in the USA. It's just that higher quality, which it is, don't get me wrong. But, you got a lot of projects that are targeting kind of like that niche market of consumers and restaurants. And more and more, I find myself working with those projects, which is kind of like a new technology in aquaculture. It's RAS farming, which is like a recirculating system. So it's like all indoors. It's hyper intensive, like typically over in Asia. The stocking densities so stocking density is, it's like how many shrimp are there in a square meter in the pond. Typically you'll see like 40, 45 shrimp per square meter. But then here in the United States in these hyper-intensive systems, you'll see 200 plus. I've seen farmers over 400 shrimp per square meter. So high risk, high reward, in those types of operations. But I could definitely see myself getting more involved in that. But, career-wise, I don't really know yet. I think I really enjoy the international aspect of my position, and I've grown to really like aquaculture as well. But more or less, I just really enjoy being part of like the global food chain. So, not really sure what the future is going to hold, but I'd like to be a part of it in the future if I can.
So before we get kind of all wrapped up here, I know I'm guilty of asking different versions of this question now to a couple different guests, but I think it helps people find out where to learn more about what it is you're doing. So say you have someone either same age or a couple years younger than you that either they're interested in international business, maybe not specifically aquaculture, but they are fascinated by this idea of global business relations, or maybe they just want to learn more about entrepreneurship. Is there any sort of books or podcasts or maybe just specific life advice you have for those people?
Life advice, man. That's a more loaded question than the previous one.
I'm leaving it very open-ended, but what would you point people towards if they wanted to learn more about, we'll say both international business and also entrepreneurship? Take it either way that you want.
Well, I mean, I think, it really depends what they're interested in. But so I was more focused in international business when I was coming out of school, and aquaculture was kind of like, hey, to do international business at this stage, you got to learn about aquaculture, because that's like the only thing at this level that will give you this international exposure. So, I found myself looking for, specific publications that focus on the industry that I was a part of. So I follow a lot of aquaculture related magazines now that are always talking about companies that win new contracts in the Middle East, companies that are developing in Africa and what their plan is. And they're called Undercurrent News and Intrafish. But I would just say figure out what you want to be involved in, and I don't think it really necessarily has to be like, for example, I don't even know. Like, I only want to work in, physical therapy. And that's all I want to do. That's all I'm going to follow. I would encourage you to take a step back and look at the market in general. Look at the more broader picture. Maybe start with looking at health and wellness and following things that kind of parallel but aren't necessarily exactly what you want to do, so you can just get a more broader picture of it. So like I said, I was focused on international business. I always follow all these different news sources, and then as you become more defined and figure out what you really want to do, those things will come up. In my opinion, those things will come up and kind of present themselves to you. It just is the natural progression of, oh, I'm interested in this, and then you see an ad for publication over here that's going to give you this story, and you click on it, and then you realize, oh, hey, this has a lot of content that I enjoy. So I would just say, look at things from a broad point of view, and of what you're interested in, and then kind of just dial it down from there and figure it out.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty good advice. Do you have any sort of books that you really enjoy, whether it's just for pleasure reading, or something that you enjoy, gives you good advice or anything like that, or podcasts or shows or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I definitely enjoy listening to podcasts and reading books. I have not been doing well at keeping up with my reading recently, but I'm actually in the middle of a book that Cole turned me on to, Extreme Ownership.
Great book.
That's a phenomenal book. It is really good, and I was reading it every day, pretty consistently, and I'm 3/4 of the way through. And then actually my most recent trip to Saudi, things kind of got a little derailed, as they do. But
that always happens to me too. I'll be on such a good streak, and then I'll lose 1 or 2 days, and then I'm just
yeah,
gonna finish it.
But I follow a lot of podcasts too. I listen to a lot of typical podcasts like Joe Rogan, Jocko Willink, a lot of those guys. I really like a podcast called Intelligence Squared. They're typically just they'll do kind of long form debates where they'll bring up specialized, or people who have specialized interests in these certain topics, and then have them debate two different sides, kind of no matter what they believe in. They could think the other side's right, but they still have to fight for the other side, and then they'll have an audience vote on it at the end. So I really enjoy that, just because it always keeps me thinking about different aspects of life. And a lot of stuff they focus on is not trade war focused, but they've discussed it once or twice, and international trade, and the ethics of kind of what you were saying earlier, just importing things that don't have strict. They're kind of like a regulations argument, and importing things that have less strict regulations than if they were produced in here in the United States, and things like that, and the benefits and the cons. But yeah,
very cool. Hey, well, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah. Glad I can make it.
Where can people find you if they want to learn more about the life of Tyler Hershey?
Oh man, well, I said earlier I was deleting social media, but I still have it. So I have Instagram, Tyler J. Hershey, and Twitter as well. I think Twitter is my favorite, but I don't tweet as much anymore. So most active on there probably. But yeah.
Awesome. All right, that's a wrap.
All right.
Thanks, man.
See everyone.
Thanks for listening, everybody. You can find us on Facebook at Insights of All Trades. Find us on Instagram at Insights of All Trades. Twitter is IOAT Podcast. And send us your insights via email at insightsofalltrades@gmail.com. You can also DM us if you have some insights, and we'll include you at the beginning of the podcast. Thanks again. See you soon.